When two people experience the same event, even, two witnesses to an accident, and they may be noticing different details, memory does not work like a videotape recorder. We don't just record the event and play it back later.
I know that I was in my art class my senior year of high school.
I remember the teacher actually coming over the PA system.
I heard it on the radio. My first reaction was disbelief.
I remember my teacher grabbing her chest. Tears began to well up in her eyes.
Dazed. We're just dazed. Anybody who was over the age of 8, or virtually anybody at the time of the Kennedy assassination, can frequently tell you something about where they were when they heard the news. And you can't do that about the day before or a few days later.
Well, in my acting days, I would often have a dream in which I am supposed to go on stage, and I can't go on stage because I can't remember the lines. And that's a dream that has recurred throughout my life. And the message that tells me, and I think tells everyone, is that we can't go on stage or any place without memory. Memory is the essential feature that enables us as humans to exist.
Memory is the mind's storehouse. It holds information necessary for survival and embraces the richness and texture of individual lives. It can be a tool to fame and fortune or a traitor at the most inopportune moment. Memory, a link to learning and a human characteristic that has its own unique role to play.
Learning is the acquisition of knowledge, the acquisition of information. It's getting something new, getting it. Somebody says the moon is made of orange cheese. That's new information. That's learning. Everything after that is memory.
I think really to optimize the learning process, we do in fact need to understand what things lead to storage and memory, what's the nature of how information is retrieved, what are forgetting mechanisms, encoding operations have to be understood if we're going to optimize real-world learning.
Rich Schifrin was a graduate student in psychology when he and Dick Atkinson, then a member of the Stanford faculty, began working on a series of experiments related to memory.
In retrospect, I realized this was quite an unusual event. And after we had carried out, some number of experiments, several of which were published on short-term memory and rehearsal processes and the like, we decided to bring all the work together in one theoretical framework.
They called this framework the multi-store model of memory, a three-stage process that begins with sensory input.
The structural part of the memory system would have sensory registers where information from the environment would first activate information.
These sensory registers allow the brain to capture the sounds and images of the crowd, but only for a fleeting moment.
Perhaps on the order of a few hundred milliseconds on up, depending on the kind of information. And then there were longer lasting activated types of information that collectively we referred to as a short-term store.
And that's what we use ordinarily in life, is immediate working memory to have conversations, to make decisions based on personal interactions.
The attention processes, the coding, rehearsal, retrieval processes, all of the control of the system is vested in the short-term memory.
But only a few items can be held in the short-term store for a brief period of time before they are forgotten or encoded for long-term storage.
Stored so that it can be used tomorrow and the day after and the week after and the week after that and the year after that.
This process of encoding information and storing it for later retrieval seems quite logical to members of the computer generation, but there are wrinkles to the memory game that are decidedly human. For example, just riding the bus to work results in the automatic processing of an enormous amount of information.
Bear in mind that in everyday life, most of what we encode into memory is information that we never knew we were going to want to remember later. It just occurs as a byproduct of everyday life.
Inputting other types of data requires more deliberate effort.
Good to see you.
So what one finds is that information or events that you've given a lot of attention to are more likely to be remembered later than information that's just on the periphery of your attention or where you're dividing your attention between two different things.
Hermann Ebbinghaus, a German psychologist back in 1885, published a very large monograph, the very first study to show the relationship between the strength of learning and the duration of memory. And what he said is the more you learn something, the stronger you learn it, the longer you're going to remember it.
There's a lot of work that shows that other things being equal, the more that you understand the meaning of information, the more likely it is that you'll subsequently be able to remember that information.
Is equal to 2CT.
Organization is important, trying to remember the big picture before you try and remember the fine details. Organizing information into meaningful categories and associating the information that you want to remember with a vivid image is very helpful. One thing that doesn't seem to help very much, which is sort of paradoxical and goes against what many people think, is just repeating information over and over to yourself.
As we attach meaning and imagery to the information we process and organize it mentally, are there strategies that help to strengthen the memory trace?
Our own characterization of how we learn, how we remember, what we can do to learn, what we can do to remember, is just wildly off. Students pick up the notion that massing their study on a given topic is a good and organized thing to do. Lots of research shows that that kind of massing is not good, that you should try to space and sort of interleave your study of different topics.
Even study skills centers, as Dr. Bjork notes, have been known to suggest techniques that run counter to research.
Almost any guide you will pick up on a college campus, one piece of advice will be to find one place that you study in, the library, the whatever, and associate studying with that place. A bunch of research has shown that if you study something twice, if you studied in two different locations, you'll actually be able to remember it better than if you study it in the same location both times.
At the heart of any memory device is its capacity to store information. Without rehearsal, short-term memory has a limited life.
Short-term memory, without further processing, is only going to last most 30 seconds or so.
It also is limited in terms of how much can be stored at any one time.
Most of us can hold in mind, can hold in our short-term memories, maybe, let's say, 7 or 8 unrelated items.
I'm going to give you a sequence of 4 numbers. I want to have you read them back to me. 7, 9, 0, 2.
7, 9, 0, 2.
Now I'm going to give you a list of 6 numbers. 6, 7, 3, 2, 4, 1.
6, 7, 3, 2, 1, 4.
Can you say them again?
But if I use 6, 7, 3, 2, 4, 1 again and again, then eventually I'd say, what are the numbers that I used? And you'd be able to tell me. Why? Because with each repetition, as you're listening to that, your brain is recording that information. And eventually these become as strong as our phone numbers, our automobile license plates, our driver's license numbers, and so on.
6, 7, 3, 2, 4, 1.
Very good.
If short-term memory is limited in its storage capacity, what about long-term memory?
One of the dramatic ways that human memory differs from man-made memory devices is there's apparently no limit on the amount of information we can store. So, in fact, rather than thinking of human memory as some sort of box or tape such that the more you have in it or on it, the less room you have for something else, all the evidence is that storage of information in human memory creates capacity. It doesn't use it up.
The search for the physical basis for memory, its storage places within the brain system, continues to challenge modern-day scientists.
We know quite a bit about how memories are stored in the brain. We know much less about where they are stored in the brain.
The thinking is at the moment that memories are recorded in the brain by changes in the way that neurons communicate with one another, by changes in the function of synapses, which are the points of communication between individual neurons. Once you start to think about memories at a somewhat higher level, though, you get into talking about different parts of the brain and possibly different principles.
There is a critical region of the brain in the middle part of the temporal lobe. The temporal region of the brain is in here, and the middle part, the medial part, would be about in here, in the middle of the brain on both sides, medial temporal region of the brain. There's substantial evidence that tells us that a structure in that region, the hippocampus, is very, very important for storing new information.
One of the most influential cases in the study of memory involved H.M., a man with epilepsy who in 1953 underwent brain surgery to relieve his severe and frequent seizures. In the course of the surgery, the front part of the hippocampus was removed from both sides of his brain.
This subject appeared normal. IQ was okay, language was fine, largely had all of the memories that he had from his previous experience, except for a little bit of memory loss of experiences just before the surgery. But this subject now could no longer learn any new factual information about the world.
3, 4.
Clive Wearing, a noted British musician, faced brain damage similar to H.M.'s as the result of encephalitis.
Do you know how we got here?
No.
You don't remember sitting down?
No.
I reckon we've been here about 10 minutes at least.
Well, I've no knowledge of it. My eyes have started working now, and all I've seen the whole time I've been seeing anything at all is that.
And do you feel absolutely normal?
Not absolutely normal, no. Completely confused.
Confused?
Yes. If you've never eaten anything, never tasted anything, never touched anything, never smelled anything, what right have you assumed you're alive?
But you are?
Well, apparently, yes. But I'd like to know what the hell's been going on.
He sees what is right in front of him, but as soon as that information hits the brain, it fades. Nothing makes an impression, nothing registers. And each time I walk into that room, it is as if it's the first time he's seen me for years.
Good heavens!
Hello. I've been here before this morning.
I haven't seen you before.
No, you haven't?
No. I've not seen anything at all before. I've been completely blind the whole time.
You don't remember me arriving at all?
No. No, I don't remember that you arrived from at all. No idea at all.
But do you know who I am? Or do you kiss all women like that?
I have. You know I love you. I don't kiss anybody
Yes,
else.
I do know. I do know. You've written it all over your diary. Look. I bet you that if I look to see what you've written, you haven't mentioned me on that page.
Oh.
You've mentioned me on this page. My first thought, I adore Deborah for eternity.
That's right.
People's entries in the diary are rubbish. What does that mean?
I've no idea.
Did you write that?
I've no conscious knowledge of it at all, no. You're showing it me now for the first time.
But is it your handwriting?
Yes, it is. But I know nothing about it at all.
So how do you think it got there?
I don't. I presume the doctor don't know.
But you must...
No, I haven't. You listen to me, please, for heaven's sake. When I say no, I mean exactly that. I haven't seen the book at all till now.
No, all I'm saying...
No, that means I haven't seen it, I have no knowledge of it at all. That's all. There's no knowledge of that book at all. It's entirely new to me. But just use your intelligence, and let's have a common which is intelligence.
But you've put... Who would put that?
I don't know, but no. Oh, for heaven's sake, use your intelligence, for heaven's sake. I haven't read this bloody thing. Well, use your intelligence.
Ongoing research with patients like Clive Waring and H.M. reinforces the role of the hippocampus in the memory process.
And the dominant hypothesis is that when information comes in, it's held within the hippocampus for a certain period of time, and that the hippocampus then either sorts that out and sends it to the cortex, or the information goes directly to the cortex and the hippocampus plays a role in the filing system. So it helps, this goes here, this goes there, but it's not the place where the memories are located. We know that from HM because HM didn't lose childhood memories.
There's different parts in your prefrontal cortex that are able to hold on to information called working memory. There are other parts of the prefrontal cortex that are very important for social interaction. So all these different aspects of our intelligence are encoded into the neural circuits in not only the cortex but also subcortical structures that allow us to interact with the world emotionally.
The more cortical activity that is devoted to the processing, the more subtle is the information that's extracted from the event and stored in memory. And what we know is that the more distinctive a memory trace is, the more likely it is that you'll be able to retrieve it later.
Hormonal activity can also play a part in strengthening a memory.
We now know that if something is interesting or exciting, emotionally exciting, that releases stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. So these go coursing through the bloodstream. At the same time, a small structure, also in the medial part of the temporal lobe, called the amygdala. The amygdala gets activated. The amygdala then instructs other regions of the brain, including the hippocampus and the cortex, in the following way from our research. It says, if you have been excited, and if information is now undergoing storage, store it more permanently. Make a stronger memory. So the amygdala is a modulator or a modifier of the strength of memory as it is being stored.
But an event that is too emotionally arousing may activate hormones that counteract the ability to remember.
Someone who is mugged and is asked afterwards what can they remember about the event, and often people can't even describe the facial characteristics of the person who attacked them. Secondly, when one is highly aroused emotionally, there's a particular class of hormones, glucocorticoids, which appear, if they're in high concentrations, to actually interfere with the functioning of the hippocampus. So once again, there may be multiple mechanisms underlying this sort of interference with memory that you get with very extreme emotional arousal.
The payoff in the memory game is the ability to retrieve the information that has been stored, to bring stored information back from long-term memory to immediate awareness.
So it's a reciprocal process. Use short-term memory to get things into long-term memory through coding and rehearsal, and then you use retrieval processes to get the information back out of long-term memory when you need it.
We have to ask the question, what kind of memory are we thinking of? So to give a simple example, the kind of memory that we have that allows us to ride a bicycle or to ski down a slope is very different from the kind of memory that will allow you tomorrow to remember this conversation that you're having with me now.
You can't tell me what you do when you have an emergency on the road and you have to stop quickly. Your brain automatically does it for you. And these motor skills have a life of their own which can't be expressed consciously.
Explicit memory is the kind of memory where when you retrieve it, you're consciously aware of the fact that the memory has been retrieved, and you have some sort of choice over how you use that memory to guide your behavior. Implicit memory is memory that's retrieved as an expression of behavior without any necessary conscious awareness that the information was even present or has been retrieved.
But sometimes efforts to retrieve memory fail.
This next joke is called see, I'm working on my... Could you not take this?
There's a joke about the guy who's talking to a priest, a minister, a rabbi, whichever your choice is, And the priest, minister, or rabbi says, "What are you thinking about these days?" And the guy says, "I'm getting along in years, so I'm not thinking a lot about the hereafter." And he says, "Oh, you're thinking about the hereafter. What do you think about?" He says, "Well, I go from the living room into the kitchen, and I say, I wonder what I'm hereafter."
Should I get off? I should get off. I'm something rude, and I apologize. I'll write it down next time.
Context cues may be helpful in bringing an obscure memory to the surface.
Could be things like the weather, what you're feeling, or your internal moods, or your thoughts, or the furniture and the colors in the room, and anything that can serve to identify the episode or event that is being accessed.
Maple Drive. It's right there.
Having more than one cue for the same memory also increases the likelihood that the information can be accessed.
1338. Go right past the gate. It helps me remember.
So you would tend to access traces in memory that were strongly connected both to the context cue and to the content cue, not necessarily either alone. Of course, there's no guarantee you'll get the right answer. There's many causes of retrieval failure, but at least you have a chance of getting the right information out.
The inability to remember, forgetting, can be frustrating, but it is also a necessary part of the memory process.
We often say things like you never forget how to type or you never forget how to ride a bike. I think you do forget. The only thing is that the relearning's so rapid that it looks like we didn't forget.
In some cases, it's important to forget what's been learned, to replace one memory with another.
It's kind of like forgetting helps us stay current. It helps to limit what we have to recall, to limit errors and so on. If I give you a phone number and say, forget that, here's the real number, it's all in your interest. You don't want to remember that first one because it's just a source of errors. But if you're a juror, and I say it's for some technical reason or this witness is incredible, are you motivated to forget everything they said? Probably not. And so all these things get interrelated, really, in terms of the way human memory works.
When something happens and you store information in the mind, it doesn't just reside there waiting to be pulled out, but rather new information can come along. You can have conversations with other people. You can turn on the television. You can somehow be exposed to new facts that can contaminate or transform or distort or supplement your memory, can change the memory. And this is part of the reason why we say that memory is constructive or even reconstructive.
In recent years, memory wars have been waged in many of the nation's courtrooms. The issue? The accuracy of eyewitness testimony and repressed memories of abuse.
Experiments that I and my collaborators have been doing for the last quarter century have shown just how easy it is to contaminate somebody's memory, to change their memory for the details of what actually happened, or even to plant entirely false details or scenarios into their mind and make them believe that things happened that didn't. I was doing my experiments on memory distortions when along came a very, very famous case involving a defendant named George Franklin. He was accused by his daughter of murdering her best friend 20 years earlier when she was 8 years old. And she said that she saw her father commit the murder, that she repressed the memory of this murder, and she repressed years and years and years of sexual abuse supposedly committed upon her. She banished it into the unconscious until now decades later when, with the help of a little therapy and other things that were going on in her life, she now began to remember these things. She supposedly de-repressed them.
So that suddenly the memory starts coming, and it can come in bits or it can come in the whole piece.
And I was actually quite shocked when I started really looking deeply in the literature to see what the evidence was for this idea of massive repression, of years of brutalization. You're completely unaware of it. And I could not find any credible scientific support for this fundamental kind of hand-me-down Freudian idea.
His idea was that we can actively prevent things from coming to consciousness. That is, repression was stuffing it down because it would be too unpleasant for us to have, right? Well, there is no scientific evidence for anything like that.
in some of these cases involving supposed recovered memories, there have been a collection of tools that have been used, hypnosis, or sodium amytal or sodium pentothal, the so-called truth serum, or guided imagery or dream interpretation. But it's exactly these techniques that I and others have worried are so suggestive. They're leading people to develop the false memories. They're putting them in a suggestible state and making it even easier to contaminate what it is they think and believe and remember.
Whether or not it happened, you begin to confuse the original memories, even if there weren't any, with the memories you generate in the course of these sessions. Eventually you can come to possess these memories as if they actually happened. And then you have real memories that you think you remember that were just generated much after the fact, and there's no way to differentiate the difference.
One of the saddest cases that I have come across in my years of working on these repressed memory cases is the case of the Ramona family. Gary Ramona was an executive with the Mondavi Winery. He was making $300,000 or $400,000 a year as a high-level executive. He lived in a beautiful house. He had a beautiful family. Lived in a wonderful part of the world in Napa, California. And his whole world came crashing down when his daughter, Holly Ramona, went into therapy as a sophomore in college, and there she remembered, with the help of her therapist, that he raped her for more than a decade, that he forced her into, all kinds of sexual acts, including sex with the family dog, that she'd repressed this, she claimed, until the psychotherapy helped make the presence of these memories known to her. The whole family was destroyed. Gary Ramona lost his job, he lost his family, his life fell apart. But in an unusual move, Gary Ramona, the father, sued the therapist for planting false memories in the mind of his daughter. And he won a $500,000 verdict from a jury in Napa, California.
I lost my marriage for 25 years. Haven't seen any of my children since March 15, 1990. I lost my job, career. I've been personally humiliated, and somebody has to put a stop to the quackery.
We now know that faulty eyewitness memory is the major cause of wrongful conviction. So that's been one of the major reasons why our government has taken an interest in trying to come up with guidelines that can instruct law enforcement about how to handle eyewitness evidence. And that's really been a way in which we've seen the work that we do make a difference.
Injustice happens. Abuse happens. Forgetting happens. But as researchers continue to unlock the mysteries of memory, we may come closer to understanding the remarkably complex workings of the mind. Inside Out is a 22-part series about psychology. For information on this program and accompanying materials, call 1-800-576-2988 or visit us online.